All right, looks like it leveled off. So great group today, 52 people it looks like to start off with and counting a little bit. I'm Tim McCleary, this year's president for CABMA, and I'm also the CFO at the University of Minnesota in the athletic department. So we're really excited to have you all today and to have our panelists and moderator as well. It's awesome to have a group, a webinar comprised fully of past presidents. We really appreciate everything they've done for CABMA and college athletics. As a group, they've got a wide variety of experiences that will really be able to, collectively provide a lot of perspective today. So quickly, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Boley, but before I do that, I just want to put in a quick plug for our upcoming convention. So that's coming up just over a month now. So it'll be June 11th through the 14th in Orlando, back to Orlando, kind of our home base in CABMA. So again, June 11th through the 14th in Orlando. The early bird registration deadline is coming up on May 12th. So make sure that you register prior to that, take advantage of the savings. And we hope to see a large group down there and have a lot of fun as always. So now I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for today, Michael Boley. She is one of our past presidents, and she as well has got a great variety of experiences in the business and leadership side of college athletics. She's had stops at Drake, North Florida, Florida Atlantic, Fresno State, UC Riverside, and back at North Florida, and then also performed some consulting within college athletics. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michael. As you have questions during the session today, go ahead and put those in the chat, and I will monitor those, and we'll get to as many as we can. Go ahead, Michael. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim, for the warm welcome. As Tim mentioned, I've been part of CABMA for many years, actually for about 23 years, and I was president in 2017 and 18. I want to thank all that have joined us today. I know this is a busy year between the semester schools wrapping up, spring sports still in season, postseason tournaments in swing are about to start, and for many, the year-end processes have started. So we're going to spend the next 45, 50 minutes getting to know these past presidents while having fun in the process, and I'm sure each of you will have your own takeaways from today's webinar. If you have any questions, as Tim mentioned, please put those in the chat, and Tim or myself will do our best to monitor those chats and get as many questions answered in our allotted time. With that said, I'm excited to be here today with this group of esteemed panelists who I've known for over 15 years. Each are experts in their own right, and between the panelists and myself, we have over 50 years of experience in the industry. I'm truly honored to be here today. Before we get into asking them questions, let's take a moment to get to know each of them. First up is Clayton, who was our CABMA president in 2008 and 9. So Clayton, if you can just tell the membership a little bit about yourself and your road to where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Michael. And let me also extend a thanks to Tim for organizing this webinar today. Again, Clayton Hamilton, the Deputy Athletic Director and CFO at Arkansas. Been back here, this is my alma mater, been back on campus the last 13 years in the role of CFO for Razorback Athletics. Prior to that, I was at the University of Colorado for 3 years, Florida State Athletics for 6 years before that. Spent some time in professional sports with the Dallas Cowboys and Cleveland Cavaliers, originally from Arkansas. Accounting degree here on campus, combined that with a sports administration master's degree and carved out a career in sports finance. So good to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you, Clayton. And Ulander, who was our CABMA president in 2018-19.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be with you all today. And thank you, Michael, for leading this, as well as Tim for leading our organization. I've been at Notre Dame now for 3 months, almost 4. Prior to this, I was at Harvard University for 2. Prior to this, I was at the University of South Florida for about 9 years and the University of Florida for 6. Prior to that, I was in private industry working for Enterprise Rent-A-Car and for Angie's List. And so glad to be here, closer to home. Quite frankly, I've grown up with this place at Notre Dame University. being in my backyard as a city boy from Chicago, and thrilled to be here to have this opportunity to speak with everyone on here joining us today.
Well, welcome to each of you. Thank you for joining us. So today we're going to cover a few topics in career development, the budget process and management, current industry topics, as well as the value of CABMA. And then we'll leave some time at the end for some Q&As. All right, so let's just jump right on in and talk about career development. And Clayton, I'll start with you. Will you tell us about a key skill related to budget planning and management you had to learn during your career?
Yeah, I guess what I would share, just don't overcomplicate the process. I mean, if that can count as a skill, I think early on, you certainly, you're dealing with, coaches and sometimes administrators that, finance and budget, that's not their, strong point, right? They're coaches for a reason, and you're going to have your process to develop a budget. Might be a university process, a system process you have to complete, but just try not to overcomplicate the process. Spend the time to communicate with your coaches, sit down, get to know their programs, their staff, what's important to their programs, and help them work through whatever that process needs to look like on your campus. But at the end of the day, you're trying to come up with a plan to help coaches and student athletes meet their goals for an upcoming year. So I think early on, just really learning, don't overcomplicate whatever that process looks like.
Thank you. Yolander, you have anything to add to that, what you've learned?
I do. I would say that early on, as you're growing through the process of running a business office, Excel, right? We all jump to Excel and spreadsheets and everything from the technical side of being very important, and it certainly is. But I would say arguably the most important tool is relationship management. Relationship management with your coaches, relationship management with the administrators in your department, and relationship management with campus colleagues is critical through this process. And so I agree with Clayton about not overcomplicating the process, but the relationship management skill of working with people is arguably just as important, because you need everyone to buy into the process, and you need everybody to buy into the priorities and the challenges that you as a business leader are going to go through, and trying to make sure that you do your fiduciary responsibilities to run the organization the proper way.
I think those are keys there. You both hit on two things. Don't overcomplicate, and the relationship management. Thank you. In your current and recent roles, we'll start with you, Yolander. How do you go about leading, developing, and delegating in this area of career development?
Yeah, so I would start with, I've got a fantastic staff here at Notre Dame. I had a great staff at the University of South Florida, really good staff at Harvard. And I would say my approach to it is letting those folks be the leaders in the process as well, right? So part of the development is kind of allowing people to run those meetings, allowing people to insert their concepts and their ideas. You give them some guidance where it's necessary, but for my staff, they are dealing with the day-to-day management of running and managing our budget and running the financials here. And so I have to also entrust that they are seeing the transactions, they are seeing the actual things that are happening on a day-to-day basis. So I like to include them and have them meet with the coaches. I like to have them be the ones that are presenting to the coaches and staff. And I'm there for support when I need to be. But I think that's part of this process, is putting them out there and allowing them to have to deal with some of those tough questions themselves. That's the only way that they're going to learn. And I wouldn't want them to go out to a new place and be the leader and not have that experience of doing that before they went in and took the lead position somewhere else.
That's great, Yolander. Clayton, how do you go about leading, developing, and delegating in that area?
I think I would echo a lot of what Yolander shared. I think that's really, really good advice. I think beyond that, and another maybe a little trick that I've tried over time is to include other units. Maybe it's your facility unit in a budget meeting with the softball coach or the football coach or whatever budget meetings you may have involving equipment room, facilities. Maybe you're event management, you'd be amazed at the different types of conversations sometimes you get into, with coaches and department heads as you're talking through a budget and some of the things they have planned for a new year. So really involving others outside of the business office, I think has been helpful. It's great experience for those staff members to participate in some of those conversations, and it helps really just with the communication outside of that room with some of the goals, objectives for a new year, and opportunities to potentially fund some new things.
Great. That's some great information and great advice from both of you. So thank you for that. Let's turn our focus a little bit to budget process and management. And we'll start with you, Clayton, here. What are your recommendations for setting the overall budget plan and framework that guides the detailed development and approval process?
We'd probably go back to what I started with earlier, just not overcomplicating the process. I try to make it fairly simple, a budget process. You're coming up with a plan. What is that plan for the new year? And then once that plan's in place, have an effective way of communicating that back out to your coaches and staff. Certainly setting the tone early on, I think, is something you need to do with your athletic director, your senior staff. Is it an opportunity where there's additional dollars to fund new priorities for a new year? Is it a year that the budget's going to be flat? Certainly setting the tone early on, but just having a plan, having a process that you can work through effectively. Make sure you have participation from your coaches and department heads. Make them feel part of the process, I think, is important. And wherever you land with the budget, just having a way to communicate that back out to where folks know where they stand going into a new year.
Thank you for that. And Yolander, what about you?
Yeah, so I agree with Clayton. Participation is key. For those who are not doing this, I would recommend doing this in kind of this order. We really work closely with I happen to oversee all of our revenue components here as well. And so the folks here who are leading all of our revenue development strategies around ticket sales and sponsorship and fundraising, concessions and everything else, we include them in this process early on. Our 3 colleagues here that are really leading this process for us in the business office do a great job of ensuring that we tie down what the revenue projections are going to be, and those folks are critical to that step. So we start with them first so that we have a really good on how things are going to go. We then next obviously are starting to really create the baseline premise around the things that we need to have in order to operate, and kind of talk to the charter companies, some of our partners where we have some contractual expenditures that are going to be taking place, and try to create some guidelines for the department that really start setting the tone on where we think growth may be, where we think there's going to need to be some consistency in holding flat. And then we start taking that out beyond the documents that we share with the coaches and the sport administrators to set their budget, to be involved and understand kind of where we are already projecting they will need to land as they submit stuff to us. We do give them the flexibility, though, to certainly share with us their wishes, because we want to know as we start looking at kind of being forward thinking about what they will look like, what they will be looking for in the future. And so we take that into consideration, so we can always have on our list. But we really set the tone as with what our expectations will be as they submit their budgets back to us.
Thanks, Yolander. I just want to ask a follow-up question to that. You're talking about your coaches, maybe putting in their kind of wish list or things that they may need going into that. How do you determine from that point who you fund and what you fund, keeping Title IX and gender equity in line? Yeah,
so we work closely. Clayton mentioned it earlier about making sure that the expectation with the athletic director is paramount, right? And so as we go into those conversations prior to, we've made sure that we understand the directions and the priorities for the athletic director. We try to see what aligns from the athletic director to maybe what coaches are asking for. And we try to see if we have the ability to fund that through the revenue plan that we've developed with our revenue colleagues here. If we can't, certainly we start putting those things on the list as we start talking about priorities with our development office on what we want to what we want to raise money for through our annual fund or through some major gift development. From a Title IX and equity perspective, we work closely with our senior deputy and our policy counterparts here to ensure that we're in line. But certainly we're always talking about the risk and trying to make sure we're doing a great job of balancing what the requests look like. And if they make sense for this year, and if they don't, we keep those in line so that we can bring them back up as funds come available.
Perfect. Thank you. Clayton, anything you want to add to that on your end?
Yeah, I think that was well said by Yulander. I think it's an ever-evolving process. I mean, we go through some pretty formal Title IX reviews, every other year, and so we're able to get ahead of some of those things. Stay ahead of any equity concerns within the department. But the list will never end, right? There are always going to be items on the list beyond what you can fund in a given year. You certainly look at fundraising opportunities, and sometimes you just have to hold on items, and when revenue exceeds expectations and dollars become available, then you start chipping away at those wish lists.
Perfect. Thank you for that. As you guys go through that budgeting process, what is that process for institutional approval or reporting of your budget, and how do you prepare for that?
Well, I'm going through my first year here at Notre Dame, and so I'm leaning on the team that's been here to lead us through that process. We are certainly, I will tell you, if you're not doing this, in lockstep with our Vice President for Finance and Administration here at the university, as well as the Executive Vice President of the university as well. And so we are keeping them abreast on kind of how things are ever changing as we look at the environment and as we look at the requests and as we project, quite frankly, what we're going to do from a development perspective and a revenue perspective and ticket sales and everything else. And so, we have our timeline that we need to make sure we have things in from a campus perspective. That process is pretty much set by Notre Dame, but we work closely with the Vice President of Finance and the Executive Vice President here to ensure that we're staying in lockstep. We might need a little bit of wiggle room because we are an auxiliary type of unit, so a little bit more time because of the complications around athletics, but we stay in touching base with them on a weekly basis.
Perfect. And Clayton, what about you?
And I would probably go back to what Yulander had shared early on about the relationships being important. Certainly having that relationship with your chancellor's office, your CFO on campus. I have a standing meeting with our campus CFO on a monthly basis, so there is regular communication about if it's current year, next year, and even beyond as far as where the finances are headed. So she knows, kind of where we're headed financially, where the opportunities are in the future, some of the, funding obligations we have coming up in a given year. So none of that is a surprise as we work through a budget process. Same thing with our chancellor. There's regular communication with him. We have, we're in front of our board of trustees at least once a year, and then anytime a major capital project comes up, we have to certainly get that in front of a board of trustees for approval. So there's regular updates to the trustees as far as where we stand, financially as a program. At the end of the day, we're a self-sustaining athletic department, generating the revenues to support our program. So that's the expectation we have, is certainly to generate the revenues on an annual basis. But having those relationships and making sure you're communicating back with your campus, I think is really important as you work through any budget process.
Hey, Michael, I would add to this that I think what helps, and it certainly helps us here, is we have and Clayton probably has this too. I mean, we have a 10-year financial model, and so the further out that you can prepare your financial model, the more prepared your campus colleagues are regarding the expectations of the department. And so it's always being refined, particularly within this environment that we're going through. But it's something that you can always point to as to the forward thinking that you're doing, but also that what campus needs to be thinking about as we are preparing for the future. So it's never a one-year approach when you're talking to the vice president of finance or the executive vice president on your level on the campuses. It's always 3, 4, 5 years out. So they have a pretty good indication of what next year is going to look like, because you're always talking about the future years as opposed to spending so much time on the current year.
I think that's a good point, Eulander. I would say for everyone to at least a minimum of a 3-year projection out for them, like you said, to keep everybody updated on campus as well. Before we move on to our questions I have for you, I do have a question from the audience. Do either of you have a worksheet you use that you are willing to share for prioritizing needs, and what does that worksheet look like?
And I would be happy to. I mean, we took a run at a true zero-based budget probably 4 years ago. Made that part of our budgeting process, and it really set some, really gave our coaches and department heads an opportunity to prioritize their requests and starting back at zero. So start back with your operating budget and kind of reprioritizing the needs for the program. Happy to share that with folks. I would encourage any school, though. I mean, you're going to have to adjust that to what makes sense for your campus, your program, as far as what your process looks like. But happy to share what we've used at Arkansas.
Yeah,
Perfect.
we do a zero-based budget process here as well. What I would say to that is, look at, as you go through that zero-based budgeting process and you ask your coaches to really think hard, and you ask your administrator colleagues to really think hard about it, just have them give you all that information. I mean, you don't need to necessarily have to have a formal spreadsheet for a running list. I think that running list just is put on a regular Excel document or Word document with maybe some figures by it, but it's something that you can speak to when you're working with your athletic director, when you're talking to sport administrators, when you're talking to campus colleagues about priorities in the future. The list goes on and on, like Clayton said earlier. You really got to figure out, do the priorities or the requests from the coaches align up with the priorities of the athletic director and the university's vision going forward?
Absolutely, well said. And if there are any forms that you guys want to share, I'm sure Adrian can take those and get those to the membership, and they would appreciate that. So thank you. Moving on, how do you handle budget accountability for sports and support units? And we all know that coaches come in, all the time, at least at my level of institutions, they never have enough money. Sometimes they're over budget and stuff, but how do you guys handle that accountability for your sports and those support units when that happens? And we'll start with you, Clayton.
Yeah, and I'll share, and some of you guys may have experienced this. Sometimes you make a comment that just kind of sticks with you over time. So early on in my time back here at Arkansas, I became known as saying the budget is the budget. All right, pretty simple. The budget is the budget. And that is kind of the statement that has stuck with me over time. And what that really means is, at the end of the day, there's a bottom line. And the way I approach dealing with any of our coaches and department heads is allow them that flexibility. It's really hard in the springtime to prepare for what that next year, the following spring, may look like for some of our sports with schedules and travel and recruiting needs. So allow that flexibility throughout the year. So if you need to spend more in recruiting and less in team travel, or more in your operations and less in recruiting, that's okay. I mean, at the end of the day, there is a bottom line that you have to stick to. And if you're not able to operate within that budget, we need to have a conversation and making sure that you have that relationship to where coaches can come to you if they have a concern and try to get ahead of whatever those issues might be. But for a department, at the end of the day, and the budget is the budget, and we just certainly operate with that in mind.
Clayton, I like that comment. The budget is the budget. I think I learned early on, I was one of those, budget is the budget, and I would say no. And I had an athletics director at one point say, okay, you can say no, but there's a good way to say no. And so I learned to actually stop and listen, to the coaches, hear what they have to say. And of course, as I got more seasoned in the industry, that was refined, definitely, because we always try to find a way, right, to make it work. But bottom line is, budget is the budget there. Eulander, what about you? Anything you want to add to that?
I agree. I've been saying here that we can do anything that we want to do but we can't do everything, right? So everything can't be a priority. We just have to figure out how we make the things that are a priority work within the financial framework. And so, we try to work much closer. We're trying to work much closer with the sport administrators because they also play a major role in this. And so I would make sure that for business leaders on this call to understand that managing the budget, while the P&L does fall under our purview and we're fully accountable to it, we also need to make sure that sport administrators are heavily involved in this as well, because they have some accountability to managing our coaches. They need to be engaged in that process. So, having sport administrators involved with these budget meetings, having them involved in quarterly updates on the financials, getting ahead of when you see coaches possibly forecasting to be over their budget early is an important step to do and important steps to take so that you're not the only person involved or feel like you're the only person that needs to have those conversations with their coaches or their administrators around being fiduciary responsible on the budget.
Perfect there. I think that goes along with this next question that came actually from our membership. You may want to elaborate, Clayton or Yulander, but they're transitioning to a zero-based budget. Are there any common pitfalls or difficulties that coaching staffs or sports admins run into that we could help with proactively?
I would say, well, Clayton, you look like you just recently may have ran into some of these with kind of starting this up maybe around 4 years ago. But I would say in that first year of transitioning to zero-based budgeting, be patient with the coaches and sit with them, work with them and help them think through what those needs are. But also be realistic with them about how you're thinking about what you can really provide them from a support perspective. Our coaches are accountable to budgets, but they're also trying to do everything they possibly can to give our student athletes a great experience and, quite frankly, to win games, right? And so we need to be patient with them through the process. I think it's important to train them up throughout that process, but also have the sport administrators involved in that part of the training as well. But help them think through how they operate their teams.
What I would add to that is, don't make the budget process about the forms that you're completing. Make it about the plan that they're preparing for the new year. A lot of time, you're going to complete the form and get the budget in whatever financial system, but really helping your coaches think through what that plan is going to look like for an upcoming year. And then, don't be afraid to take the meeting outside of your business office. Sometimes it's helpful to meet at the coach's office, meet at an athletic facility to where you can really see what the coaches are seeing on a daily basis, what the needs are for the program. To me, it's a lot easier being out within your athletic department, putting your eyes on things and helping to better understand what these coaches are trying to communicate, whatever their plan is for the upcoming year.
So Clayton, I'm just going to add to that or ask you guys a question. How do you handle with some of the conferences not giving their schedules out early, right? You go through the budgeting process and that doesn't always align when the schedules come out for the next season, right? And so then you always hear the coaches, I don't have enough money to go where the conference even is making me go. How do you at each of your institutions handle that balance between the timing of when the budgeting process is on your campuses? I'm assuming a June 30th. I know we're all a little bit different, but most June 30th. And then the timing of the conference and the scheduling. Yeah,
really working with coaches. You try with whatever information you have available to set that team travel schedule or that game operations budget for a particular sport, but then having some sort of contingencies in place, I think is important. Having some sort of contingency budget. Maybe you hold that at a departmental level. Things are going to pop up throughout the year. So, to the extent you can, try to be conservative with your revenue projections, realistic with your expense projections, and as things come up, if things change throughout the year, you've got some dollars to work with throughout the year.
Perfect. Yolanda, anything you want to add to that? What you guys would do?
Yeah, no, I agree with Clayton. You got to have some contingency. So, for those that may be budgeting it, I hope no one is budgeting at 100% of the revenue projections, right? You got to hold back. And you got to make sure you're having that conversation with the athletic director too. You got to have some contingency, particularly for those spring sports schedules and those teams that don't get their schedules out, those conferences that don't get the schedules out right away.
Perfect. Another question here from our membership. What would you recommend someone do when they are starting a new job and leading that institution's business office? Yolanda, we'll start with you, since you're just starting over at Notre Dame.
Yeah, I'm just starting over at Notre Dame. The approach that I've taken is I've been lucky enough that I've got really good folks over here, excellent people in the business office. My portfolio of oversight is large, so I'm glad I have these very talented people in the department. So what I've really done is relationship building. I have worked hard to have a solid relationship with our VP of Finance and our Executive Vice President. I've dove into the systems, but I'm really sitting with the team and having them read on historical performances, historical context, so that I understand where the place has been in terms of kind of the context of where we're trying to go. I think the relationships are critical. I know everybody is focused on doing Excel spreadsheets and things. You can do that stuff at home. I would spend a lot of your time during business hours sitting with your people, sitting with getting meetings with your the folks that you need to make sure you're reporting up to on the financials. I would spend a lot of time working with them, talking with them, getting insight and access to things that you may not know about right away on the surface, so that some things are not surprises when it comes down to really putting the numbers into systems.
Perfect, thank you.
And what I would add, yeah, Michael, I mean, just going back to when I started here at Arkansas, just spent a lot of time listening to our coaches and department heads, kind of back to what Yolanda's speaking to, is, setting up those individual meetings, going out to their facilities and just, listening to the coaches as far as what the challenges have been, either, funding certain needs for the program. Sometimes it's just an operational challenge. Sometimes it's a challenge with the process, but just listening to whatever, the coaches, the folks on campus, administrators are sharing, just to try to gather all that information and set your course of action from there. And then I'll share too, I mean, I share this with a lot of folks as they start on campus here. It, in my opinion, will take an entire year. You've got to see an entire year through a process to learn the Arkansas way for me, right? I knew how we did budgets at Florida State and Colorado. You kind of got to learn the Arkansas way and what tweaks that may come up on a particular campus, but try to spend that time early on just listening to folks and again, chart your course of action from there.
Yeah, Michael, can I want to reiterate what Clayton just said there, which is critical. We are a part of the institution. And so what Clayton is getting at is so right. You have to learn the way of the institution. Don't come into any place enforcing your way. Learn how the institution has done things. And as you do that over the course of the year, then you look to see where you can make modifications and where you can help improve systems, maybe find efficiency. But listening and really understanding that we are part of a larger system of the university's enterprise will go a long way to being able to make changes that you may want as a new leader in a department and on campus.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. So as we shift now to current topics, let's talk about your biggest challenges as you plan for next year, FY24. How are you handling communication related to those challenges within your department and with the campus leadership? And I know we've touched a little bit on it, but if we can maybe expand on that. And Clayton, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and really just going back to what we shared before, I mean, with campus, just being in front of those communications, like Lander mentioned earlier, having that, 5 to 10 year plan that always is somewhat changing, but keeping your campus updated on what those future challenges are looking like. But then being very honest with our coaches and senior staff, administrators, department heads, as far as what the challenges are. Within the business office, you're not going to be able to fix everything. I think your job really is to try to compile, all the different, needs of your sports and programs throughout the department, come up with the revenue projections and, see where you land with a budget for the new year and, sharing that back with your athletic director, senior staff, and helping them be part of the process. But I think communication is key with campus, with coaches. Just don't try to solve all the problems yourself. Make sure you're communicating back, and it needs to be a collective effort to meet whatever challenges you may have.
Thank you, Clayton. Yolander?
I agree with that. Don't hold back, right? Don't hold back on your communication to campus in regards to how our industry is evolving. The evolving in collegiate athletics is essentially higher education as a whole, and we are part of that evolution. And so the campus leaders, if you have relationships with them, need to make sure you have relationships with them because they will become aware. Trustees and board leaderships of the universities will be aware. And so it's important that you know what's happening as our industry is evolving so that you can have conversations with them that they are confident that you are aware of what's going on from a future perspective within the industry and let them know what some of these hardships and challenges may look like. And so that's the type of stuff you should be working on daily. That's where the 10 to 10 year projections certainly help because you can start creating some modeling behind it. And while it may not be all right, because we're always evolving, it at least gives them insight into some things that they need to have on their radar going forward.
Yeah, and I think what those things are, Yolander, kind of you're talking about kind of leads into our next question, but you guys already answered it. But it's just that ever-changing evolution and changing of the landscape of college athletics with the Alston payments, right? The NIL, the volunteer coaches, the impact on student athletes becoming, possibly employees, the expanding of, postseason and all of that. So any additional thoughts besides what you've already said on planning for these items? Because, sometimes they pass in January and then they're effective in August.
Yeah, I mean, we've been looking at legislation in all the different states here. We've been looking at all of this pretty extensively. We have a working group that is looking at the future of collegiate athletics, and we're thinking about all of these things that are coming down the pipe. And so we're looking at worst case scenarios, right? If all this stuff compiled on top of us, what would that impact be to Notre Dame? Not only financially, right? Because that's one way to look at it, but operationally, relationship wise, the larger scale of how it impacts the institution, different components that you have to work with. So while you're leading the business office and people might only view you as the financial person, I would encourage you that the business office is the business of the institution, of the department. So you need to be looking at all of these things. How does it impact you financially? How does this stuff operationalize? When we're looking at facilities, well, when we're talking about adding all of these coaches and all this personnel, how does that impact your facilities? When you're talking about the relationships with student athletes, how does that dynamic change with the workforce and how your benefits look as an employee versus how their benefits may look like as an employee of the institution, and how that will be managed from a campus perspective, not just internally. So I would take that approach of looking at it holistically and not just financially, but operationally, strategically, and every component that we're hearing about from through legislation currently.
Clayton, anything you'd like to add?
And what I would add to that, I think one thing that COVID taught us is that the economics of your program could change pretty quickly, and we had to adjust to that. And what I remind our folks of often is we survived. We survived a global pandemic and the economic impact of that. So we will survive whatever that looks like going forward within college athletics. The economics absolutely are changing. We're going to have to change with it. and set new priorities and come up with new opportunities to fund some of those priorities, but just trying to get ahead. Kind of we keep going back to that theme, planning, communication, looking forward, I think is critical. Having those relationships, having those conversations, and you're not going to be able to predict what 2 years looks like today, but you need to be having that conversation. You need to be planning and preparing your coaches and leadership for any of these changes coming in college athletics.
Agreed there. And also I would tell the membership, if you're not on like D1 ticker or looking at our industry and what's going on, depending on what level you are, in your organization, make sure that you're doing that, as you, Lander and Clayton, have mentioned, to understand what is going on in the industry and what changes are coming. So you can definitely go out to D1 ticker and get their daily updates on that as well. We have a question from membership. How do you factor in inflation as it relates to travel, meals, etc., when projecting expenses? So Clayton, we'll go ahead and start with you.
I mean, you can put a number to it, Michael. I mean, certainly, whatever that looks like in the part of the country you live in, if it's, 2%, 10%, 20%, certainly factoring in costs going up. But at the end of the day, you got to make decisions. And if last year you traveled across the country for a non-conference competition, if next year that trip costs you, 20% more, you're going to have to potentially change your schedule and look at, whatever changes may need to be made going forward. But again, for us, at the end of the day, we've got to balance a budget. We've got to operate within the resources we have. So you can factor in inflation, but you also need to factor in how you make changes to how you're operating to cover whatever those costs may be.
Thank you. Lander?
I agree with Clayton on that one. You can factor it all in, but you've got to factor in how you operate too. You can't just be, we're going to increase our budget just simply because the cost of doing business is more. You have to figure out how you're going to operate within the environment, within the financial constraints that your organization may have. And so that's a critical component to get across with coaches. And we have to do a great job of communicating that to your colleagues, but also sport administrators that are working with these coaches on a day-to-day basis. They also have to have an awareness and understanding of that element, because coaches will certainly jump to the cost of doing business. It's more expensive to fly. It's all of these other challenges are going to be the first thing that they jump to. And so we got to help reposition how we look at the increasing of costs to how we may need to change how we operationalize.
Perfect. Well said. As we move here to our next topic of value of CABMA, that's what brought us all together. So what has involvement in CABMA meant to you, and what recommendations do you have for members to gain value from CABMA? And Lander, we'll start with you.
I was fortunate enough to meet Michael and Clayton when I first got involved in college athletics. It's meant the world to me. That's why I have no problem doing this. I love coming to the convention and trying to help all of the young people who are coming into the industry get to know all of us in CABMA. I would also say that the value you gain from CABMA is the relationships, right? We can have these conversations about budgets. We can have these conversations about coaching compensation, facilities, revenue generation. We can have all of those things. And you can do that stuff offline as well through phone calls and emails. But the relationships are critical in CABMA because we are a critical piece of the industry. We are the people that our director of athletics, our campus colleagues are depending on, and we should embrace that. And you should embrace getting to know more of your CABMA colleagues as well to help you be better, not only professionally, but personally too, because we have some wonderful people in the organization who care not only what you're doing within our industry, but if you happen to leave our industry, there's many people that we stay in contact with that are no longer in this industry because the relationships were important. And so I would just keep that in mind, that CABMA is a close-knit organization and family-oriented, and we look forward to seeing all of those who can make it in June in Orlando.
Clayton, what about you?
Echo those comments 1,000%. It's all about the network and the relationships. I mean, I got involved with CABMA early on when I was at Florida State. And I like to share with folks, Mike Bone was the athletic director at Colorado. I did not know Mike Bone, but through CABMA, I knew folks that knew Mike Bone. I did not have a relationship with Jeff Long at Arkansas, but through CABMA and NACTA, I knew people that had common connections with Jeff Long back at Arkansas. So it was critical for me as far as career advancement, throughout my career, looking at different opportunities. So the advice I would give is really back to what Yolander shared, is you absolutely need to go. You absolutely need to get involved, and you absolutely need to meet people. Everybody attends CABMA NACTA to create those networks and connections. So great opportunity to meet new people and establish your own network at that convention.
I would
Go ahead, Yolander.
say that, building the relationships with people, but make sure they're done authentically, right? So it's not always about going to these events to get a job or to find the next move. It's about authentically building these relationships. And that's how I've gotten the opportunities that I've gotten, is through just calling people to see how them and their families are doing. And then you find out stuff that's right. People call you because they just want to connect and find out how's everything going. And then they may present an opportunity to you, but that's only happening through genuine relationship building, as opposed to seeking someone out to get something, right? And so I think that's just important to know in this organization too, because it's also a small group, right? Everybody in our space kind of knows everybody too, and they know the people who are authentic and genuine and in it for the right mission. So I would just make that a point of emphasis for those who are coming into the business, to make sure your relationships with folks are genuine and authentic and about the right thing.
I echo both of what Yolander and Clayton said, because relationships are key. And I know that I could pick up the phone and call Clayton or Yolander or anyone here in the membership, to ask questions, like Yolander said, see how they're doing. I know many of us, if we're traveling with teams or different things, will stop in to that city just to, say hi to someone, but not looking for someone. So I definitely like that authentic aspect of it too. And I know for, CABMA, believe it or not, for those that know me, I actually was shy when I first came into CABMA back in 2001, but meeting these wonderful people, Clayton, Jamie Pollard, Dave Merriam, some of the people that are still around today, it's been wonderful, so I would definitely echo everything that Clayton and Yolander said about that, which leads me to my fun question. What has been your fondest CABMA and/or CABMA convention memory to date? And Clayton, you've probably been in longer than Yolander or I, so we'll start with you.
So back when I was on the CABMA executive committee, I had my year I got to plan the convention, and that was probably the one year that the budget was not the budget, because we blew it out. Like it was in Dallas, we had a suite at a Texas Rangers baseball game, and we had a spread that would rival probably any recruiting function on any of our campuses. But that's probably one of the memories, just being able to really plan that convention, connect with sponsors and presenters, and plan the activities, events that we have with CABMA is probably one of the highlights.
Great. Yeah, that was, I remember that one too, Clayton, right above the bullpen in the outfield, watching down there. That was great. Yolander, what about you?
Well, we can talk about bus rides to different outings. We can talk about dinners amongst colleagues. I haven't had a CABMA that hasn't been enjoyable. I haven't had a CABMA where I haven't met someone new, quite frankly, which has been great. Don't miss out on the outings, right? Don't miss out on the social gathering, because those are the moments that allow for you to get to know people. And whether you think it's not important or not, whether you think it's important or not, it is certainly something that you should certainly give a try in terms of making sure that you're socializing with your colleagues. I think one of the things that I would say as someone who has been in it a little bit longer is that what I want to try to do with this next one is get to know more of the younger folks who are coming into the business, because either people are retiring, we have more things that are coming onto our plate, and I'd like to make sure that I know who's up and coming and who has a thirst for doing this good work, so that when I do get calls, I can recommend people, or when we're looking for someone, well, we can call people directly and seek their interest. And so that's something that I'm going to be working on this summer to ensure that I don't lose touch with all the folks that are coming into and entering the business.
Oh, perfect. And I would say too, for those that are coming for the first time or within the first couple of years, still maybe hesitant and going up to meeting people. Like I said, 2001, Salt Lake City was my first one, and Clayton remembers that outing. I'm sure. So for those of us that remember that one, we have little chuckles. Ask us about it at the convention and we'll tell you what happened at that one. But for that one, I knew no one. Remember coming in and I happened to be standing near someone, Greg Davies, who was at UNI at the time. And I happened to know someone at UNI that was at Drake with me. And so that kind of started the connection and the conversation. So always try to find a connection. And that will help spur off and then meeting other people. And if you don't have any of that, come up to Yolanda, come up to Clayton, come up to myself, Tim, any one of us, and we will be happy to take you by the hand and introduce you to others. So just take that initial leap there. So thank you guys for telling us about your fond memories. That was great joyride back in memory lane there. We have a couple minutes left for questions, and I know we were answering some questions along the way. I don't see any right now that are in the queue, but if you have any, go ahead and shoot those in to the Q&A queue, and we'll try to get those answered here in the next couple minutes. But as we're waiting for that, I have a couple of additional questions. How can business officers play a role in managing the relationship between collectives and the development office? Who wants to take that one?
This is one that's challenging. I think all of us, right? It's the money, the support has to come from somewhere, and it's important to be engaged in those conversations with the development officers to make sure that they understand that we can't have drop-offs in our normal budgeting operation. But this is one I think all of us are trying to work through. I don't think any of us have a solve for it right now because it's so.
What I would add to that is maybe just taking the question a little bit broader. I mean, my approach has always been, the business office is involved in managing all aspects of the athletic department. We are not just football, basketball, baseball, track, tennis. I mean, we are involved in every aspect of the athletic department. So just making sure you've got a seat at the table, whatever that issue may be. It could be NIL, it could be Austin payments, it could be facility projects, whatever. Just making sure you're, as the business professional, you're part of those conversations, I think is what I would recommend.
Perfect. Let's see if we can answer a couple more before we get out of here. Can you speak to mentors you've had and advice they've given you that you still remember? Clayton?
For me, Greg Phillips was an important relationship I had early on. Was my direct supervisor at Florida State. Was the one that really got me involved in CABMA early on, and back to the advice. And it was really the same thing we're trying to share today: is get involved, go to CABMA, get involved, create that network, and it's going to be important throughout your career.
Perfect. Yeah, let's see, our final question here before we sign off. For the new folks, and this is from one of our past presidents, for the new folks, since you both have varied experience, what is the biggest difference from being at small schools versus a Power 5?
I've spent my career at three different Power 5 institutions. What I would say is, at the end of the day, you're managing a college athletic program. Your budget may be $10 million or $110 million. It's fascinating how we all spend dollars roughly the same, financial aid, salaries, travel, recruiting, et cetera. Just at some programs, the numbers are certainly a little bit bigger, but creating a plan, knowing your mission of your department, creating the plan, communicating that back with your coaches and leadership, I think is what I would say is critical.
Ulander?
Yeah, I would agree with that. We are all dealing with the same challenges, just the numbers may be a little bit bigger or are bigger. So the plan has to be the plan, and how you operationalize that plan is really critical. The communication is really critical. Now, some may have a little bit more flexibility than others, right? I think that may be where what the question is kind of getting to, that flexibility that maybe some of the P5 schools have versus some of the schools that have smaller budgets. But it still is about having guidelines, having a framework of how you're going to spend, having a framework and a guide to support your coaches and their aspirations, and to give the student athletes the best experience possible that your school can give. And be careful about comparisons, right? Because not every school is operating the same way. And so we can all get caught up in comparisons. So what I would suggest is really being thoughtful about what is the best that your school can do, figuring out what's the competitive advantages that your school could provide, and making sure that you have the right people there that believe in those competitive advantages, believe in the institution's mission, and activate your plan in that manner.
Great. It's been wonderful these last 60 minutes. And whether your takeaway has been, budget is budget, not about the forms, it's about the plan, making sure the relationships are there, meeting with people, listening, to people, include other units, whatever that may be for your institution. You guys provided a wealth of information to everyone. And I'd like to thank both Clayton and Ulander for being our special guest today, and for Tim setting up this webinar. And before we sign off, to echo what Tim said at the beginning, remember that we have a convention coming up June 11th through 14th, with the early bird registration deadline being May 12th. We're going to kick off the convention on Sunday, June 11th, with the Welcome Social and Doug Beard Memorial Golf Tournament. And don't worry, you don't have to know how to play golf. Just be there to have fun. We're going to be at Top Golf Orlando. So whether you're playing or just bouncing back and forth between all of the bays, meeting people, we welcome each and every one of you there. Buses will start departing the bus loop at 5:15. Recommend being there at 5. Be ready to have some fun and find that bus. Have an amazing afternoon, and remember to smile.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.